is coming. Yeah. Is the Wi-Fi working?
Dr. Mate, we are back online.
All right. So I can proceed. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I was just making my introduction in terms of the IRP. Maybe program director, before I proceed, imagine if I was in the middle of a serious operation in a hospital, and then all of a sudden there's a power cut. What will have happened? And every day, colleagues and friends, comrades, this is what's happening. So we are faced with a very, very serious matter that needs urgent attention. So I thought I should just make those opening remarks, program director. But let me. Okay, there is an echo, but I will proceed. So the picture of load shedding, that especially what happened in 2022, I think we're all familiar with. This is just to emphasize, to send the message home that in 2022, the South African economy lost 560 billion rand just because of load shedding. And my view is that if the EAF, the energy availability factor, was above 70%, probably will not have experienced, the serious load shedding that we experienced in 2022. And things are not getting better in 2023. So it's not like all of a sudden we are out of the woods. But it's got serious, cost implication for the country. And by the way, the 560 billion rand that was lost due to load shedding, we could have invested that money in other urgent, infrastructure projects for the country, including building new power stations, whether it's coal, nuclear, or renewables, doesn't matter. So we really need to arrest this problem that we are faced with of load shedding. Otherwise, 2023, it's going to be worse than 2022. So by the same token, I just want to make it very clear, it does not mean that the government has done nothing about this situation. We all know, I'm moving on to the next slide, we all know about the National Energy Crisis Committee. And then recently they put out an action plan, and this action plan talks to 5 interventions with specific actions, of course. Whether the actions are going to be effective or not, it's a different matter, and I'll touch on it towards the end of my presentation. But let's look at the first one. So they have come up with the first intervention: fix Eskom and improve availability of existing supply systems, stabilize and increase the capacity. So we're all on the same page, and even the NECOM agrees on this, that the first step towards fixing or towards sorting out the load shedding, let's fix Eskom and let's increase the availability factor that we are faced with. Number two, enable and accelerate private investment in generation capacity. This must happen, but it's going to take time. It's not going to happen, in the next couple of months or whatever. It may take anything between 18 to 24 months before we can see the benefits of new capacity being introduced into the system. Accelerate procurement of new capacity for renewables and gas and battery storage. We know the challenges around renewables, friends and colleagues and comrades. So let's not really get into those details. Renewables will not on its own solve the load shedding problems that we are faced with. We need to deal with the coal fleet that is currently installed. Number four, unleash business and households to in rooftop PV. This is a great opportunity, and I'll talk about it towards the end of my presentation. And then lastly, of course, it's a restructuring of the electricity sector. This is a long-term project. It's not going to help us in the short term to fix the challenges of load shedding. So we all agree, and the National Energy Crisis Committee also agree, the top priority to fix load shedding as we speak is to fix Eskom. That is step number one. How we do it, we've got different approaches, and I'm going to talk about what I am proposing as a way of fixing Eskom. This is just the details. It's all in the public domain. This is the plan that came out of the National Energy Crisis. They've indicated what is possible in 2023, what is possible in 2024, and what is possible beyond 2024. But we cannot wait. We just cannot wait. What is it that we need to do in the next 2 days, 3 days, 2 weeks, 3 months, 6 months? It's, to me, as much as this is a great plan, but I am missing the details around what do we do in the next 3 to 6 months. And that detail is missing. There is some aspects of it, and I'll share what Eskom is working on based on their media briefing that they had about a week ago. But I'm really missing what are the immediate steps that needs to be taken to stop load shedding. And I'll talk to those ones towards the end of my presentation. So I've spoken about the Eskom response. Yes, Eskom has responded. The next slide summarizes what the Eskom CEO, Andre de Ruyter, and his team presented to the nation on the 22nd of January, about a week ago. And it talks to what needs to happen between now and the end of the financial year, which is 31st of March 2023. And their aim is to increase EAF from the current 58% to about 59%. So 1% increase, and that's not sufficient. Then in the next financial year, they would like to increase the EAF to 65%, and have identified the interventions that needs to be implemented. And then, of course, by FY 2025, they would like to increase EAF to 70%. So I am saying, what is it that we need to do to immediately make a huge jump in the EAF from the current 58%? Or so. If we could do, great things during the COVID-19 pandemic, why don't we have the same energy that we were putting into fixing or dealing with the 19 pandemic? And almost on a weekly basis, we were getting updates, from all levels of government. But all of a sudden, when it comes to load shedding, we are not getting these constant updates, what's happening, and I'm even suggesting that perhaps the president of the country, Honorable Cyril Ramaphosa, must declare a state of disaster. We are really, really beyond talking about, no, there's a crisis of energy, etc., etc. I don't want to get into the details of the impact. We all know about what has happened to small businesses. We all know what is happening to people, especially in hospitals, etc., etc. But I don't want to get into those details. So as far as I'm concerned, we are really facing a disaster. It is no longer a crisis. We are now faced with a disaster, and we need to do something urgently, not government alone, all of us. We need to say, what is it that we need to do, including ESCOM, private sector, the ordinary men and women in the street. What is it that we need to do to make sure that we address the crisis that we're faced with? So ESCOM has got a plan. The National Energy Crisis Committee has issued a plan. How do we make these plans come alive? And that's what I'm going to talk about towards the end of my presentation. And there are other things, by the way, you can do at the provincial level. And without going through all the details, the issues of small-scale embedded generation, the issues of shifting the residential load to gas, storage, battery storage, and creating virtual power plants, rooftop PV, offer incentives for people to go back to a very successful program, the solar water heating program. It was very successful with rebates, etc., that was there in the past. So we've got a formula how to run this, and we know how to, give people rebates, and we know the institutions that can operate and administer these programs. So we can do it immediately, and maybe as we can focus on rooftop solar PV and use the same, regulations that were there in the past. Another big opportunities, especially at the municipal level, is the rollout of energy efficiency initiatives. The water treatment plants that are all over the country, the buildings, public buildings, that we can look into what needs to be done to reduce the electricity consumption. We can also look at the DSM, the demand side management initiatives. By the way, and I spoke about we all need to contribute. By the way, just imagine if all of us were to switch off our geysers. Whenever there is a system constraint, we just switch off our geysers. That, in my view, we can probably save anything between. So it's us as citizens of the country that can also make a contribution. Just switch off our geysers. Of course, we need an automated way of switching off our geysers because you cannot keep on and off your geyser. But that's something that the technology is there. We can do it immediately. It doesn't cost that much money to automate switching on and off of your geysers. The last one is time of use. If we can just shift, instead of using a lot of electricity during the day, we shift it towards, after 10 at night, we all start doing whatever we need to do, ironing, cooking, and whatever. But during the day, we try as much as possible to avoid utilizing energy intensive operations at our household level. So I'm drawing to a close, program director. So we've seen the National Energy Crisis Committee plan. We've seen the ESCOM plan, and I say, so what is it that needs to be done immediately to fix the problem? Number one, the system operator must maintain the balance between demand and supply. Otherwise, if we lose the grid, we are even in a much bigger problem than just the load shedding. And people have spoken about, to recover the grid, it can take anything between 2 to 3 weeks. In my view, it can even take longer than that. So we really don't want to get to that point. So the system operator must do everything possible to avoid the grid collapsing. And so the balancing of the demand and supply, it's critical. Then, of course, there's businesses, especially small and medium enterprises that are suffering. They're shutting down. People are losing jobs. What do we do with these people? Do we just say, oh, thank you very much? You'll see when the load shedding is sorted out, you'll see how you recover from your business. So government must intervene. The commercial banks must also intervene and come up with schemes how to assist these businesses that are busy collapsing as we speak. Poor household. Some of us can afford to go and buy an inverter, can afford to go and buy a generator. Poor household cannot afford to go and buy these gadgets so they can mitigate the risk of load shedding. So what do we do with it? If we could do something during the COVID-19 pandemic and, give people 350 Rand or whatever, why are we not considering that? So these are some of the practical things that can be done immediately to alleviate the challenges that you are faced with as far as load shedding is concerned. Essential services are collapsing. I spoke about hospitals. There's some hospitals that can afford generators and buying diesel on a continuous basis, but some hospitals cannot afford that. So what do we do? So in my view, we need to focus on the demand side first. The demand side, there's existing incentives, and we need to, I spoke about the solar water heaters. The program was very successful. Let's reintroduce it, but add to it the rooftop PV. So if I install a rooftop PV at my house, I should be able to reclaim or claim back half of the cost that I've incurred as a result of that. There's also other programs. Sanedi is rolling out the 12L tax incentive program, very successful program, but the uptake is very low. So a lot of the businesses can actually take advantage of this program. If they install energy efficient systems in their operations, and they can claim tax and pay less tax, etc. So it's a huge opportunity that is underutilized as far as I am concerned. Then I've spoken about the solar water heaters and switching off the geysers as well. It's a huge opportunity, but what's in it for me? If I switch off my geyser every night to support the system, what's in it for me? Will, live in Johannesburg? Will City Power, reduce my bill accordingly? Those are the things that we need to be looking at to see how we can incentivize people that can afford to install these gadgets. They can do it on their own without anyone, without the government paying for it. Then the last one, allow the household and commercial and industrial businesses to sell the surplus small scale embedded generation back to the grid. And the city of Cape Town has already, made a pronouncement around this. I think the rest of the country must follow suit. And we, especially us coming from state-owned entities, we need to facilitate this to happen and, put the relevant policies in place and the regulations that are necessary and, to make sure that we're doing this in a safe manner going forward. But the big opportunity is on improving the EAF. I spoke earlier about Eskom is targeting 59% improvement from 58%. I think we need to think bigger than that. In my view, we need to be focusing on the 70%. What is it that needs to be done? What are the extraordinary steps that must be taken in the next 3 to 6 months to drive the EAF to get to 70%? It may be painful. We may have to continue load shedding for some limited period, as long as we are implementing the mitigations that will help us to achieve the 70%. And then my last slide, Program Director, now talks to what are the immediate steps that must be taken if we really want to show that we're taking this load shedding serious. Number one, I've spoken about a national state of disaster. That, to me, it's a first step that must happen. It enables Eskom, it enables government to do extraordinary things around procurement, around mobilization of resources, etc., just like we did during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we need to enable Eskom to be able to do things faster. But the only way to do that is to declare a national state of disaster. And I believe we're in a disaster already. A disaster is defined as an event takes place and the citizens are able to, on their own, respond and deal with that event, and hence you declare a disaster. Now, in the beginning, I've spoken about hospitals, I've spoken about, poor communities, etc., etc. They cannot recover from the current situation. So it is a disaster. So we just need to, convince the authorities, to buy into the idea that we've got a disaster on our hands. Number two, the release of budgets, so that the OEMs or whoever needs to do maintenance, they've got a contract for the next 5 to 10 years. But to give me a contract for the next 12 months, it makes it very difficult for companies to mobilize their resources if they just have a short-term contract. So we need to be giving contracts over a long-term period. Number three, outsource maintenance to OEMs. And this is not the day-to-day maintenance that happens at the power station. This is maintenance related to outages, planned outages, outsource it to OEMs. Some of them are on the ground already, but the contracts are structured in such a way that they are not risk-based or risk-benefit-based contracts. So we need to review those contracts, restructure those contracts, make the OEMs accountable for outage slippages and make them accountable for unit trips when the unit comes back from an outage. And of course, if the unit operates properly, they must also gain from it. We need to relook at the contracts, how they are structured. Number four, establish site-based recovery teams to provide maintenance, planned maintenance oversight. And we must not sit in our posh offices like where I'm currently talking from, and say I'm providing oversight what's happening at the power station. Set up a site-based team, appoint a project manager to oversee and report directly to the power station manager. And the power station manager must be fully delegated to make decisions, so that when there's a pump that breaks or whatever, they know exactly where they need to get it from. The power station manager can make things like motivation and memos and whatever, go to various committees, and in some cases even go to National Treasury and to get a decision. So we need to really empower the power station managers going forward. So site-based teams to provide maintenance oversight, a site-based team to provide partial load losses recovery, oversight. There's a lot of opportunities in partial load losses. I think on average now Eskom is carrying about 7,000 megawatts, if I'm not mistaken, of partial load losses. Half of those partial load losses can be recovered if you just have a dedicated team, that monitors the coal quality and monitors the water chemistry, monitors the environmental compliance issues and whatever, and then where there's an opportunity, do the maintenance online. So I believe out of that 7,000 megawatts that is part of the partial load losses can be recovered. Then the next one, establish site-based recovery teams for environmental compliance. We cannot ignore environmental compliance. Otherwise, very soon, some of these units will have to be shut down because they're not compliant. So establish site-based teams to do process optimization and even start looking at upgrades. What sort of upgrades need to be implemented to make sure that we are complying with the environmental laws of the country. The next one, mass recruitment of technical skills. And I want to emphasize the word mass recruitment, not just, a little bit of there and whatever, mass recruitments, learners, artisans, technicians, engineers, highly specialized engineers and whatever, deploy them to these power stations. But when they get to the power stations, they must be operating under a structure based at the power station, not, reporting somewhere else. The second last from the bottom, use local universities and universities of technology to conduct investigations. We've got these capable individuals, instead of researching pie in the sky type of, the nation now requires them to focus on the challenge that we are faced with. Research on load shedding, look at what can be done at the power station in the medium to short term and long term. But they should not also be coming up with recommendations that are not implementable. They must come up with recommendations that are implementable. The last one, probably the most important intervention that can happen tomorrow. You've heard about the staff morale. The people that are at the coal face, some of them financially, they are not well off. They've not been looked after, and then it sort of, incubates a bad culture. People start, being innovative in terms of how they can make money. They create overtime that does not exist. And we've also heard about criminality, people breaking equipment and whatever so they can get more work, etc. It all boils down to, what's in it for me? Why should I work so hard when I'm not being compensated properly, etc., etc. So, Program Director, let me stop there. I can carry on for the whole day, but we really need to start doing something immediately. And all these workshops and whatever that we're having, I think we should all be going to the power station and providing the necessary support. Thank you. Let me stop there. Thank you, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mate. If you can also hold on. It's now time for questions and answers. And just to indicate that we're running a bit out of time. So when you ask the questions, please go directly to the question. Don't give a speech. We do have our speakers who gave the speeches, so let's not give the speeches. So maybe let me just read a few while people are still thinking. We'll take 3 questions, and then we'll please indicate where you are directing the question to. In the meantime, let me just read a few that we received online. The first one says, it's a question regarding the lack of transmission grid capacity in the Cape region, Northern, Eastern, and Western Cape. It says, looking at how no wind projects were selected under bid 6, what is the solution to get over this constraint, and what are the timelines? As there has been loss of confidence in the DMRE procurement processes. That's the first one. The second one, I think this one is specific to Tabang. It says capital costs globally tend to relatively lower for oil and gas power stations, moderate for onshore wind turbines and solar photovoltaics. They are higher for coal plants and surprisingly even higher for waste to energy, wave and tidal and offshore wind and nuclear energy. It seems there's a preference by government to move towards nuclear despite cost, safety, and others. Is there a reason for that? The other question, last question from this round, before we allow people to raise questions, it says, in the bid windows, why do you need bidders to pay security of rents, 200,000, I think 200,000 per megawatt? Surely, if bidders are chancers, they will not reach their financial close. If bidders say, I have money to build, why are you stopping them? I suspect that is for the department, but let's open I think there was a question there. Sorry. I think they'll deal with them. I think let's take 3 questions and then they can deal with more, because there's a question there. Yes, maybe let's start here. Yeah, no, there's a mic. Maybe just introduce yourself and then ask a question.
I think you're not going to be unfair to us, to want us to drive all the way to come here, and you want us only to listen to the speakers and what to tell us. We must be short. We take off our time to come here. And I think you are not a reverend or a priest from where you are. Where you call the congregation, you preach, and you go, you say, go home, you are blessed.
Yeah, thanks. Please, let's get to the
I'm
question.
James Khadina Bokao. I'm the chairperson of BBCBE in the Northwest. Mine won't be a question, but I'm encouraged and motivated by the contribution of my president and Mama Mashele. Now, President, apartheid was not defeated in a boardroom. Those who went to Robben Island and exiled, they ran away. They left us in this country. We fought and defeated apartheid on the street. The political will that Mama Mashele is referring to, there is no political will. The capture that Mama Mashele is referring to of the West countries is real. You just from the state capture here, they wasted the money of the state capture. The state is captured now by Stellenbosch mafias. Let's take this fight to the street. You will come here, talk English, tabang, you will have your nice programs, policies. The mandate comes from Stellenbosch. You'll have your coal get exported. If you don't take the fight to the street, continue, President, to speak English. Now, what must happen? BBCB has done the boardroom work. Let's have a campaign. I'll tell you one campaign that I want us to engage in. State of Nation address, we must go and picket as BBCB, as BBC. Arrange that program. We take advantage of the State of Nation address, the media, even the investors who have captured our cabinet will be looking at the State of Nation address. I'm not asking question, unfortunately, Program Director. Now, we having our coal being exported, and we know where the harbor is. And you come and say, I must drive and come and sit here and listen to the English that has been spoken here. Let's have a program where the BBC goes to the harbor and tell those who are loading our coal on the ship and say, stop. Now. Then interpreting the legislations of exporting or trade or whatever, do it there, but when, stop for now. Now, President, please, with due respect, write a memo to ESCOM. Request them a list of companies that have been supplying ESCOM. You'll see where the problem is in Tate Masoch. They did it deliberately to fail ESCOM, that we must say now ESCOM has failed, then they bring something else. That is why Mama is saying the German ambassador came here and pleaded for coal, but the West are saying leave close the mines, but they are taking the coal to Europe. Now, apparently I'm saying, you're sitting here with activists who are not afraid to be arrested. Speak English with them in the boardroom, give us the program on the street. Some of us, we have done it, we know how to do it. In conclusion, CEO, they marched to Lutuli House, we bought shamboxed. We moored them to show them that the problem is not here. You have captured these people. Now you come and march here. Now that's the only thing that must happen, because you have almost done, President, 100% work of solutions of the energy in this country. And the only language that the ruling party listens to, straight. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Can we still limit our questions? Because we must give an opportunity to everyone to ask questions. We appreciate your presence.
I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Katlego Logodi. I'm from the SABC. I wanted to find out around the issue of the national state of disaster that the BBC is calling for. Is this something new? You've spoken about the marathon of meetings that you've been having with government. Is this something new? And is this something that maybe probably there's been an appetite from their side to entertain this? And if not, what reasons have they given to say that why there's no urgency in implementing the national state of disaster? Again, there's a report that I've just received now around ESCOM saying that ESCOM is going to be borrowing 4 billion rand for diesel, as the Treasury is not going to be funding the entity for the purchase of further diesel. I'd like to really maybe try find out from you if ESCOM moves and goes start borrowing money from other banks on its own, would that be prudent in us, resolving the energy crisis, because they are in immediate need of diesel, as we hearing right now, but then Treasury is not willing to give them about 4 billion rand that will cushion them for 2 months to try and keep their lights on. Hence now we are hearing that they're going to be, or they've been allowed or given the leeway to start approaching other businesses like your banks and the likes to try finance them where this purchase of diesel is concerned. So is this a prudent move according to you, where then government would say we can't help you, but then as an entity you're allowed to approach other sectors to try borrow money? And just around the issue of what you're raising here, the 11 points, when do we see them, reaching government? Do you have certain timelines in terms of when this will be presented to them around what you've been calling for in terms of those 11 points that were presented by Ntate Maroga? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think let's take last question. There's a question from there, and then we can ask them.
Thank you, CEO. The name is Alvin Nell. I'm from the Black Management Forum. I just wanted to say, one, that the lack of will is something that we must add to our recommendations. It's a critical thing. The second thing is that of accountability. Year in and year out, we know exactly who caused what, who's the culprits. There's now 149 million of overalls. What is the consequences? We've got to put that out to our people, because communities is just tired. And then demand side power supply or reducing the power supply. There is solutions, very effective ones on grand scale within the BBC. It has been recommended to ESCOM. Once again, lack of will. They are just not interested, and that will help a great deal. I think from the BBC side, how do we take those kind of programs forward and get it implemented? Thank you.
I don't know who's going to
This one?
start.
I was going to be the last one, Chair.
Yeah, we'll have another round of questions.
I thought since well it's just close to me, I can just one question.
Maybe just shoot.
Very close one, quickly. Look, speakers have spoken. Much has been said. We all are familiar with the problem. France, by the way, from BMF. I'm of the view that it doesn't matter how much we can talk and march and all of those. It's not going to help. We've been seated with this problem for more than a decade now. That yes, you have come up with suggestions, and speakers have also made assessments in terms of what needs to happen. It's very clear that we have a government that's not really prepared to implement what has been suggested. There's not patriotism by those that are in charge. There's not implementation. In line with what Northwest has just said, my suggestion will be, BBC, you are seated right at the front line. Perhaps, like it happened during apartheid, it's important that people need to be concertized about the truth with regards to the issue of energy. We've been fed one side of the story. We don't know the other side of the story. When apartheid was engaged, it was from a viewpoint of people being concertized and mobilized. We need to start to begin to do that. And once people have been concertized, then it's easy for them to move into actions, because of then they know what is the story behind what's happening in the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we'll start here and then we'll... okay, maybe start with you.
Yeah. Thanks for the questions. I'll start with the first one around transmission grade capacity and the 3,200 megawatts of projects from bid window 6 that couldn't close because there was no space to connect them. And we need to go back about 6 months ago. Government released an updated document. We call it a Schedule 2 document. What that document does, it opened up space for the private sector to put up any size capacity, a power station, to supply any private business that is looking for that capacity. So after that document was released, what then happened is a lot of private companies went to ESCOM, the ESCOM unit that allocates grid capacity. They booked a number of locations for projects that are yet to come. A few months later, we launched Bid Window 6. The participants of Bid Window 6, when they were looking for that capacity, it was no longer available. And this is the problem that was created by government, right? And I'm taking the blame as well because I'm part of government. But when one looks at the genesis of Schedule 2, and one minister was reluctant to issue that Schedule 2, right? And we are now facing the results. And I hope that my other colleagues understands the technical reasons behind that reluctance. I don't want to get into politics. The solution, so what we are now doing is we have engaged ESCOM around the rules that must be changed to allow grid capacity. So those rules will be amended. If someone books a grid space and they don't use it, there will be penalties. The second is we are looking at issuing programs for specific provinces. Right? So we will issue a round for Limpopo, as an example, right? Because we know there is space there in Limpopo, and the competition will be restricted to that geographical area. By when do we want to do this? Before the next bid window round is issued, the rules would be changed and the site-specific program will be launched. The second question was around the capital costs, and the gentleman states that some technologies are more expensive. He mentioned oil, he mentioned coal, he mentioned gas, he mentions nuclear. And he then says government has a preference for nuclear, and nuclear is the most expensive technology. You know, I want to go back to what my co-presenter mentioned, the arithmetic of megawatts. So not all megawatts are the same. So when you compare nuclear, you must compare it with technologies that has the same characteristics. Don't compare nuclear with wind or with PV, because then it shows that you don't know what you're talking about. So when we look at base load, right, we need base load for system stability, and that's what I've been saying, and my colleague was saying the same thing. We are advocating for nuclear because it's part of our base load. So what other options do we have in the base load category? It's either nuclear, it's either coal, it's either gas. And we don't have big enough hydro, such as DRC, to have a base load hydro. So within that context, then you realize that nuclear actually is not that expensive. Yes, the capital cost upfront is expensive, but once you've spent that money for the rest of the operation of the plant period, you get those dividends back. So I think we need to do a little bit more research before we blame government for having preference on any technology. We advocate for energy mix, including wind and solar. But what we are experiencing is that other people, for them, they think that for them to advocate for their preferred technology, they need to attack the other. And that's not how it works. The 200,000 megawatts, what is the reason? Bid Window 5, and I want to focus on that. We had a number of developers giving us very cheap tariff on solar projects. Right? The Russia situation happened. The economy sort of slowed down. Their cost increased. In other instances, their EPC cost, construction cost increases. In other instances, those costs multiply. But as government, you have signed on the dotted line. So we expect you as a business person to deliver on what you signed on. Because if you don't deliver, then we take that deposit that you'd have put in. 2010, we had a similar problem where, as qualified as they are, these developers, they will give you a document. Once you sign on that document, and once they get shortlisted and appointed and the work must start, they want to come back and negotiate the numbers. So we are putting this 200,000 per megawatt deposit to safeguard the integrity of the program. So that if you submit your documents, you will know that you must ensure that there are no rooms to maneuver, because if you do that, then you lose your deposit that you've put in. Otherwise, if we don't, then we get these so-called professional companies giving us documents that they know they want to negotiate sometime in the future. I think those were the probing questions to me. The others were comments, and obviously we take the comments on board. Thank you.
Yeah, I think on the issue of the state of disaster, I'll defer to the president or the CEO to talk about. But I think in the initial proposal, obviously it wasn't there, but you could see now that over the past 6 months, anybody who doesn't believe we're in a real emergency, has not seen, where we are. So it is clear that extraordinary measures are required, and hence we're putting this on the table to say, I think, empower the process to deal with this thing, by declaring it a disaster, so that you allow certain processes to take over. I just want to maybe just emphasize the thing that Thabang has said, because it came up in our meeting at the BBC, the issue of transmission grid and what has happened with the opening up of private sector. And I just want to elaborate what this means. So, private companies are now allowed to generate for themselves or to generate for others without the involvement. The involvement of ESCOM will be if they have to, what is called, will the power. Let's say you've got a mine in Mpumalanga, but you want solar from the Northern Cape. So you connect to an ESCOM grid in the Northern Cape, you take off from the grid in Mpumalanga. That is called wheeling. So it's like you're using ESCOM as a highway, and they pay you pay the toll to use that highway. But the problem now is once you open it up and anybody can do it, so what happened is that private businesses went to ESCOM and said, where is the grid available? And then, of course, this is publicly available. They went and secured that capacity for themselves so that they either can sell for them, do it for themselves or other private companies. The problem with that is that they are not obligated currently to do it now or to do it any other time. They can keep that for as long as they want. So they can actually sterilize the grid for private purposes, where the state now has got no move to unlock that grid. So this is the consequences of opening up things and not understanding the fuller meaning of it. And this is the thing where the state, in my view, I think still need to have a lot of control on how the power systems evolve. Because once you just allow it to private sector, you don't know what's going to happen. Because that private sector may take 5 years to take it to its board, to get it approved, may take another 2 years to build it, and even if they build it, they can use it as much as they want. They're not obliged to sell it to the state. So those are the kind of risks that I think have come up with this, and I just want to raise that. And thanks, Thabang, for raising it. Thanks.
So the only point I'm going to mention is the demand-side management initiatives. I think it was in 2008, please correct me if I'm wrong, Jacob, you spearheaded the EEDSM initiatives where people were coming around to our homes, exchanging the light bulbs, solar water heaters, and a part of that, unfortunately, was hijacked by politics. We find ourselves here again. Important to mention when we say we want solar PV and we want all of these things, everything has tariff implications. So you will have to pay. Now the question is, if you're going to subsidize Lungile for her solar PV on her rooftop, it means somebody in Tembisa needs to pick up that tariff increase in order to subsidize me. How fair is that? How equal is that in an unequal society? Even if we look at solar PV, what is my use for PV in the evening? It's TV, Netflix, to keep my wine cold so I can cook. It's basic stuff, right? But for my domestic worker, because she cannot get that PV, because she's not in an is safe and that will justify having 10 panels like on top. I don't even think that you can have panels informal structure, whether it's a shack or in whatever. So that doesn't even apply to poor people's problems. So it means that that poor person will not be able to feed their kids in the evening. They will not be able to light up their home or help their kids do homework or practical things. But we're sort of saying that let's continue with the inequality and let's continue by the poor having to subsidize the rich. That's the other angle of this that I just want to bring to the fore. Do I support PV? Absolutely. Do I have it? Absolutely. I can afford it. Do I think that somebody else should be subsidizing me? I don't think so.
Thank you. I think I'll talk about the diesel question. I think part of the reason why everyone around this table is talking about increasing the energy availability factor is because it's not sustainable to run the economy based on diesel. An imported product that has an exchange rate implications for South Africa. This is exactly the crux of the matter. You cannot sustainably do that. Imagine now, Eskom, I mean, they've got their board, they've got their own governance, they can do whatever they want. But imagine now, you're going to spend 4 billion on a resource that you're going to use and waste and not use again. Whereas if you are fixing, at least and getting an energy availability factor that is relatively higher, you are reducing your dependence on diesel over time. Of course, it cannot happen overnight, but I think that that's the issue that we need to think about.
President, maybe you want to take a bite, or otherwise, let's get Dr. Mate also to respond, and then I think the President, when he closes, he'll deal with the other issues. Dr. Mate.
Yeah, thank you, Program Director. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Yeah, I just want to respond on the issue of the disaster. I think we've gone through all the stages as a nation. Government has gone through all the response in terms of treating the load shedding as a crisis. We are at a point where, in my view, I'm fully aligned with the Black Business Council on this, that we are now faced with a disaster. And I indicated, if a national disaster is declared, it allows for a number of other interventions, like we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, there must be a proper control. We don't want a situation that happened with the PPE procurement during the pandemic. But it's the only way. If we really, as a country and as citizens and the government, we want to show that we are really taking this load shedding seriously, we need to go that route, unfortunately. Thank you, Program Director.
Thanks, Dr. Mate. We'll take another round of questions. Remember, we said we're supposed to finish at 1, but maybe let me read other questions before I'll come to you, TG. The question online, it says to Ntate Thabang, please clarify if the new nuclear is an alternative to Inga, or if it's it's an alternative to Inga or both. Plans must be realized. My view, we need both, not either or. That's the first one. I'm reading them the way they are, so don't judge the English. The second one, I did not have the time to go through the Director's plans, but I see the priority on Dr. Mate's presentation that the focus priority is on coal stations. The question is, Dr. Mate, is the outage plan, dates and scope present in the plan? So what happened to the Karab system at Eskom? And why was this outage center of excellence done away with? The other question, why hasn't car power ship program been prioritized and exempted from all these bureaucratic processes the same way Eskom was exempted from implementing BE policies? Who must be held accountable for worsening this man-made crisis that could have been avoided? The other question, how are you going to solve the refusal of the nuclear fuel permission for Quebec nuclear power station? Does that mean Quebec future functioning is doomed? The last question before I go to the floor, to Maroga, please could you comment on the issue of high temperature maintenance material used in OSCOM boilers, such as tubes and pipes? Where's Marcel? Yeah, let's take these two questions. TG, we'll start with you. And,
Hi, my name is Cindy. Can I?
Yeah, proceed. Yeah,
okay. Cindy Mkuteni from Kuji Consulting. I actually have a concern. So I realized that with Fish Solutions, they published that in Q4 of 2022, South Africa is attracting quite a lot of investment on the automotive sector. So my question is the whole plan for mitigating the load shedding issue aligned to the investment plans and opportunities that are still upcoming? Because we may find ourselves in a situation where we think we've resolved an issue, but investment and activity commercially is active, and we don't actually meet a point where we've resolved the issue. Thank you.
Thanks. I give it to the TG and then they said.
Good afternoon. I don't have a question, just a comment. I'm putting on my hat as the commissioner at the Presidential Climate Commission. President, I know you're gonna, you're gonna make the concluding remarks, but for me, this session, it's long overdue, and our paper, which will be supplemented by the knowledge and expertise of our presenters, has to find its way to the SONA. Because I suppose if we cannot achieve that, what the chairperson of the BBC, BBC
Business Council in the business.
Sorry, yes. We might find ourselves ending there. Just a comment. I think the point was made by Ntate Maroga that we should be aware that the scientific modeling that is used to determine our national determined contribution is done by lobbyists. I'm not going to mention names. Those that are funded by international stakeholders, as well as national companies with vested interests. So that creates a problem, because we've got that number that when South Africa goes to COP, you say, this is the number that I'm committing to. Although legally, you can always, and that's what I think, we need to revise, because I'm not sure if you're aware that the number, COP27 this year, it's even more ambitious. So we're going that way. So for me, it's a worrying factor. And also, when you are in a meeting, and you've got, it's not just us as commissioners, and you've got people who are attendees, and you've got your ministers haggling. It just shows that as BBC, we need to step up, because it does not bode well for the future of this country. And it's not abating, it's continuing. And other issues that I think we need to concern ourselves, I like when said we need to bring everything together, the political, the technical, the strategic angles to this, because it's not a one-dimensional problem. The West promised 100 million to developing countries many years ago. Nothing happened. Now, we are promised 151 billion. I think that is the $8.5 billion. I think I've asked as a commissioner, we've asked as BBC, what is the composition, of that investment plan? What part of it is debt and what part of it is grant? It's not coming out very clearly. So those are worrying factors. I mean, a few months ago, the UN, UK, France, Germany, US, the envoys were here. And while they were here, they came to speak to business. And what they were speaking about, because it was just business, as BBC and BUSA, they were saying, guys, we need you to take up the cleaner energy technologies. But then you realize that, it's the technology that is coming from somewhere. So, and then I asked a question. I said, but you've just fired up your coal plants. And the answer was, it's only for 6 months. So even if you ask Date Minele, whose job, he's not a commissioner, his job is to understand that investment plan. I haven't heard anything from him. So I'm just saying these are some of the things that we need to concern ourselves with so that, as BBC, because I'm not sure what is in BUSA's paper, but NBI, it's a member of BUSA. And NBI's model and others, and Meridian and others, that's what we discuss at the commission. And that's what we take there. So we are committing everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, TG. Masedi, I think there's a lady there. If you can, maybe I give to him and then give the lady there. There's another question while Masedi is giving. They said the question is on the new development bank massive rollout of the battery energy storage system. Where is the IRP 2019-2030 in this space? Maybe, I don't know if you'll understand the question, but yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Raquel Msimango. So I used to work as an investment banker funding mining and energy projects at RMB. I've now moved and I'm running my M&A investing in mining and energy projects. The question I have is to the Chief Director at the DMRE. So, we've spoken so many things today, and in my mind, you cannot separate mining from energy security. It just doesn't work. And we've mentioned how our coal is being shipped off. You need so many other commodities that go into producing solar PVs, like zinc, copper, silicon, so many. So, how, to the DMRE, are they having any engagements with the miners? Because we can't say we're trying to get to energy security without those engagements, and we can't leave them behind. But another question, or a follow-on on that, is we talk about the just transition, and there's so many of our, we know a lot of our ESCOM-fired power plants are in Mpumalanga, and the DMRE is not granting closure certificates to those mines. And so many miners are saying they could be using those mines once they are closed to farm solar, to convert to wind farms, which makes sense. If you look at Mpumalanga, about 200,000 people are employed directly by the mining industry. So if we close our coal-fired plants, but we're not given, or the closure certificates are not granted, how is the transition then become just? Because the miners cannot then move on to say, let's now move to the renewable energy. So I think my question is really what needs to happen for the DMRE to grant closure certificates to miners, and what conversations are happening between the DMRE and mining, because the two cannot be separated if we are to achieve what we are talking about. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we're running out of time, so we will close the questions. And the people are here, so I think you can take the questions after the session. What we'll do, we'll start with Dr. Mate. Please just give your closing remarks. You'll answer the questions in the meantime, but in that, please give closing remarks, and then we'll come back to the panel of the people who are here so that we can close. But all these inputs are going to be taken into consideration when we finalize the BBC paper. Dr. Mate.
Thank you, Dr. Mataban. Let me first respond very quickly. I know time is not on our side. I'm not a spokesperson of ESCOM, but I participated in that media briefing they had on the 22nd. So they're focusing on coal. They're also focusing on nuclear. That Unit 1 at Kubek that is currently on an outage to make sure that it returns back to service as quickly as possible. But there are also, there are power stations that are running very well, the likes of Mitupi, Letabo, Matimba, and the peaking plants. So Eskom is trying to focus on those to make sure that they don't fall into the same trap where you find the likes of Duva, Tutuka, Kusile, etc., etc. They're also focusing on Kusile Unit 1, 2, and 3 and accelerating the units that are still under construction. In my view, this is a perfect plan that Eskom is working on. It's really driving the message that we need to improve our EAF. We've got installed units that are not operating as they should. We need to fix them. It does not mean that we must ignore the medium to long-term, projects that others are busy with. So I think in closing, Program Director, for me, and I'm very happy with the energy that I'm hearing, even though I'm not there physically, but I think we're on the right path. We just need to turn these ideas and plans and whatever into something that is implementable. And we must not wait for, pronouncement or SONA or whatever. Tomorrow, we can actually start working on how can we support Eskom. And I keep emphasizing immediate plans for the next 3 to 6 months. And then medium term, it's the next, 18 months or whatever. And then long term, it's beyond 3 years or 5 years or whatever the case might be. But what do we do in the next 3 months? And I think in my presentation and in some of the plans that I've seen, they are talking to some of the immediate plans, but we just need to implement. Thank you, Program Director, and thanks for the invite.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Program Director. We, and I understand all the questions that have been asked, and that maybe there's, expectation that will reply to each and every one of them. But what I want to pose to everyone in the room is, as a country, what economy are we advocating for? Like 15 years, 10 years down the line, what type of South Africa are we advocating for? Do we want to be a tourist destination type of economy, or do we want to be an economy that takes advantage of mineral resources that we have? And once you answer that question, the next question around what type of energy mix you need becomes pretty obvious. Right? So that's my first comment. And the question around the economy, I think the politicians must agree what type of economy we want this country to be. The second part, our approach, and we did have discussions with Meridian, we did have discussions with NPI. We differ with them. We differ on fundamentals. And that's why what was presented last year, October, November, we are not aligned from technical modeling point of view. And we are going to engage them when we do the review of the IRP. But our approach has always been, let's do the technical studies first before we commit the country. And unfortunately, then you get other influences in the equation. You don't end up going to COP27 with the best solution for the country. So I want to leave it there in terms of closing remarks.
Yeah, I think similarly, I think some of the technical questions can be left for individual engagements. And on the issue of the high temperature things in the boiler, Dr. Mate's paper, I think, is very eloquent in talking to the generation, the thermal generation technology, and what can be done. And I think people must read that. My closing remark, I think, just to emphasize what Thabang have said. First of all, let me just say, I'm very affirmed by the inputs of the technical the panelists today across the board, because I think we are crossing a Rubicon in South Africa where technical experts in the field are beginning to stand up and talk to the engineering technical issues and you could see convergence coming through. I mean, people like Tabang, in my view, should be the spokesperson of the energy plan, because that's where it resides. Now, for the first time, you hear, in my view, I hear an engineering and technically sound plan. I mean, I don't agree with everything, but it's based on what, from a power industry, we can resonate with. But unfortunately, other people have been dominating this space. But I'm glad people like Tabang and the department in this conversation. Lastly, as the BBC, and I think it's the big question, and I'm going to cite China, right? China contributes 30% of CO2 emissions in the world. It's the top emitter. It's building 4 times the size of Eskom in terms of coal stations. It's got 1,000 gigawatts of current coal production. It had made a statement in terms of the commitments to the world in terms of the Paris Agreement. China have said, we are in a phase of development. And our development is going to be based on the resources we have, and coal is part of that development. We're going to ramp up, and I think the ramp-up date is that we're going to ramp up until, I think, 2030, 2035. We're going to plateau with our CO2, but we're going to go to net zero by 2060. And they've made that their fundamental stand. So what China is increasing coal, no excuse, right? But on the same time, China is riding on renewables. China produces almost 90% of PV modules in the world, and it's probably 80% of the other in the world, right? So it's ramping up coal, they're building for the world, but they're clear that unless we have reached our developmental goals, we will ramp up, and we will plateau, and will come down. If you ask what is the position of South Africa, it's unclear. We have not made a firm statement about our developmental path economically and how that is going to be powered. And then we can say to the world, this is where we are, this is where we're going to go, and we're going to stop here and come down. And it's based on what Tabang says, what is the economic goal, what is the developmental goal. In the absence of that, we're going to be hitting each other in the street, but we are not talking from the same basis in terms of our developmental goal. And I think that's, for me, what the BBC should actually rise up and define. Because if we can define that, and in fact, the issue about the world is pressuring South Africa, no, South Africa is pressuring itself. We actually go out to go and create pressure. The COP26 document that came to say we're going to close our coal mine, it didn't come from the COP26. It came from us, right? We gave it to COP26 to justify. Then they're saying now you don't want to get the money if you don't close your mines, right? No one is pressurizing. All these things are voluntary commitments based on your developmental goals. And I think unless we deal with that, we're shooting us in the foot. But I think I'm really affirmed by today's. Thank you very much, President.
So you sort of hijacked my point, but I'll approach it from a different angle. Africa has over 1 billion people. 60% of these people are not electrified. When the EU comes to talk to you, they're talking to you because they want to electrify the 60%. And they want to electrify it with their technologies. They have a plan for Africa. Africa does not have a plan for the EU. We are simply a market for their products. Once they are done selling us that, they're going to come back in 20, not even 20 years' time, in 10 years' time, and they're going to sell us clean coal tech. And that is what happens. And I'm going to leave it there.
That is what happens when you don't have your own plan. I agree. And then in terms of my remarks, I'll just confine it to two issues. We have an imperative to address security of supply in the country. And yes, carbon emissions are a concern, but each country should decide what makes sense for its country to be able to do that. And there's various technologies that talk to the technical aspects that my colleagues were talking about here. Nuclear power, which is a swear word for other people, is exactly that. No carbon emissions, baseload capacity. What's the problem? The second one that I wanted to talk about is just about ESCOM again. I'm sorry to hop on this. I believe that the energy availability factor can be increased. We saw recently an issue about penalties. That's penalties because there's non-availability and the coal is not being used, but the coal is contracted for. There's nothing wrong with that because that's how the contracts work generally in every industry. But these are where the inefficiencies are, and that lead us to spending too much on diesel and others. So we need to really be serious about solving this issue, and it can be solved. Thank you.
Thank you, President. I think you can close before I...
Rise up, BBC, rise up. Rise up, BBC, rise up. Colleagues, let me first thank the presenters, including even Dr. Mate, for spending time with us today. And I think for us, this is a clear affirmation that the battle and the fight on energy is not a fight for BBC alone. Despite the fact that we remain as the voice of the black business people and professionals, entrepreneurs, and the range of other majority of the people that happen to be black in this country, they have hope on us. And I think that's where we need them to start from. Secondly, some of the issues and questions that colleagues we have raised in our interaction with the government, the presidency, and various ministers, the question of the national disaster, it was mentioned. And I think to answer your question, in the next coming few hours or days, we'll be advancing a clear position to the presidency and his team that we need them to declare a national disaster on energy. And once then that is declared, it then triggers a different legal framework in terms of how then do we deal with ESCOM, how do we deal with energy in terms of dealing with the security of energy in the country. And I'm saying these are some of the issues that will be advancing, because it then means the question of ESCOM continuing procuring and borrowing money for diesel, it then comes to an end, because now the procurement takes a different form and shape, and we have learned lessons from the Solidarity Fund. And that's the point that I wanted to raise, so that there is clarity in terms of these issues going forward. The third part that we'll be doing again as an organization together with other formations in this space is basically then to continue tapping their knowledge and the experiences and advocating in the public gallery the position that we believe and stand for, so that again we are providing clarity out there. I mean, the point that Tabang raised in terms of the type of society, the type of economy that we require, it is not only left to the politicians, it also fair and squarely belongs to us. We need them to define, do we want to be an industrial country, we want them to manufacture, we want, if then the answer is yes, automatically then means we need them to look at different energy mix. But even if we then talk about a different energy mix, there must be a dominant in terms of the base load, not in terms of the IPPs and other things. Now, the other thing that, again, we need them to understand without any ambiguity, colleagues, is that in the public gallery, people, they are fighting for a continuation of a capture, but of a special type. Because even when we met with the presidency, I mean, the colleagues, they will tell you, one of the questions that arose or arises from business constituencies that
why are we then moving ESCOM to Minister Gwedemandashi? So it's not about the location, it's about an individual. And it then means because they've identified him as a problem in terms of triggering and defending the coal power stations in this country. And I'm saying that is the reasons why they're now identifying and targeting him as an individual to say ESCOM needed to be relocated somewhere, not under his watch, or automatically they're arguing for a split of the two departments. And I'm saying, I'm raising that point so that in the next coming few hours, when you then see a statement from Black Business Council saying energy must basically deal with ESCOM, it must then be understood. It's not about an individual, it's not about the name of a person, because even the ruling party, they've taken a resolution from the policy conference and confirmed by the conference, the 55-year conference, to say you need then to split or deal with the DPE. Transport must go to transport, to line ministries. ESCOM must go to energy. And I'm saying you cannot then have a policy and implementation fragmented. Defense minister must deal with DINEL because that is a clear line minister. I'm saying these are some of the issues that it then resonate well in terms of the alignment, execution, and number of other things. And that's the point that I wanted to raise, so that people, they should not then think that that is a Tabang issue or Comrade Gwedemandashi's issue. This is a national issue that we need then to talk about, the alignment, complementarity in terms of the execution of policies and the implementation. And I think the other thing, going back to the notion of a national disaster, if we then push and ahead and achieve that, it then means we'll be then calling number of you then to participate in various streams. Remember, if you then declare a national disaster, you need then to have different structures in terms of procurement, in terms of how do you register on the database, how you then to deal with the bid windows and various other things. So these are some of the things that when there is a call for nomination for people then to participate in various issues, we need then to have that understanding, to say we need competent people that they know what they want. We don't want people that they will go to a particular stream and say, are there any opportunities in terms of tenders? We have passed that stage. The last parting point that I want to raise is that this is not going to be an easy path. The number of individuals and organizations that they put money in terms of pushing and forging ahead in terms of running down the coal power station at the expense of the solars and a number of things. One of the things that we need then to ask ourselves, again, the point raised by Ndate Maroga, we are part of BRICS, but we are not utilizing the BRICS expertise. We have Russia, we have China, we have India, we have Brazil. The BRICS, constitute 43% of the world population. I'm saying 43% of the world population, in which 1.2 billion resides in Africa. Now, if again we cannot then configure and understand the notion of industrialization for the continent, and this continent being a dark continent in terms of energy, it then means that we have lost the plot somewhere. And I'm saying we need then to go back to the drawing board then to understand exactly the political configuration and how countries and individuals they position themselves. Because in most cases, we as black people, we don't want to spend money, we don't want to allocate time to deal with national issues and national questions. When they open the debate and discussions in parliamentary committees or processes, the entire process of parliament will be dominated by non-governmental organizations, that they will be there with their dogs and cats as individuals, but they are funded by big companies to push a particular narrative. Our black members and constituencies will be basically watching television. We don't want them to participate anyway. We don't want to create time because there are no
financial benefits for us as individuals. And I'm saying we need then to move away from this individualism and greediness that is gripping on us. The other point, when we met, I think on Wednesday, at our special council, we said, one of the things that we need to do as an organization, we need then publicly, without any apologetic, defend and advance our agenda for industrialization, defend and protect our professionals that are placed in various organizations. They might be in ESCOM, they might be in various government departments, so that they should not be pressurized then to accept and be coerced to a particular position. If we're then to do that, I can tell you we'll then say free at last, because it then means one, as the black constituents in this country, will then remain resolute, will remain firm in embracing an agenda for transformation and building this country to a better for all of us. And I thank you. Thank you very much, President. I think I just want to ask the other two national office bearers to stand up so that you can see them. The TG, if you can stand up. And then we've got the newly elected one, Vice President for Professionals. So I think yeah, and I think, President, your summary is very, very clear. This country is our country. We've got nowhere to go. And especially as professionals, we've basically outsourced our responsibilities to politicians for 29 years. When politicians came here, when democracy came, we then said, these are our people, they understand our issues, they'll raise them, but 29 years later we realized that they are not raising our issues. So I think it's upon all of us as professionals to stand up, because this is our country. Stand up, what President said is very important. When there are parliamentary processes, there's going to be a parliamentary process on a public procurement bill. Let's go there in numbers. Even if you are repeating the same presentation, let's do that, because it helps the bureaucrats when they count to say there were so many blacks, there were so many this, there were so many this. But if it's only the BBC alone as an organization going, no one goes. The other side, there are like 100 people. When you are sitting there as a bureaucrat, you're thinking, so there were 100 people who are agreeing with this. So let's do that and let's fund our own struggle. Because most of the time, black organizations are struggling mainly because they're not funded by black business people. Most of them, they only come to us when they've got problems. And that's not how things are supposed to work. Look at Solidarity, AfriForum. It's basically running the country. Every time a government minister here, AfriForum is going to take you to court, they immediately stop what they were thinking. So we need to strengthen the BBC and other black organizations so that the voices are many, and then we can be able to deal with this. But I would just like to thank you people online, members online and non-members who are also here. Thank you, the panelists. We'll still talk to you as we finalize our position. So we'll be sending you WhatsApps and emails so that at least we can have a clear document that when we take it to the public and when we take it to government, the ruling party and other parties, because we're engaging with other parties that are in parliament, is a very solid document. I think the special thank you goes to Masedi and Sisipo. I think they're here. I'm not sure if Masedi is there. But yeah, thank you very much for the hard work to make sure that this event is successful. I think they deserve a round of applause. Yeah, and those that we may have offended one or the other, that was not the intention. We are very robust, and we always appreciate robustness, because that's the only way we can resolve the country's issues. Thank you very much for your attendance. Sorry, I forgot the important thing. There's lunch this side.